Welcome to Geezers, Gadgets, and Gizmos, the podcast where we explore the tools, ideas, and conversations that help people live longer, healthier, and more independent lives. And today's topic is one that almost every family faces at some point in time. And yet, typically, most people feel totally unprepared to handle it. And that is, how do you choose the right living or care situation for an aging loved one? And fortunately, we have with us today a professional who helps families navigate this critical question each and every day. She's Elizabeth Marquis, founder of Aging Well Connecticut, and she works with families facing one of the toughest emotional and complex questions that they'll ever have to face. And finding the right living or care situation can be really tough. But we're going to have Elizabeth with us to help explore this. Welcome, Elizabeth, to Geezers, Gadgets, and Gizmos, the podcast.
Thank you, Garrison. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for highlighting this very important topic, which is just becoming more and more relevant and interesting these days. So I'm very excited for this conversation.
Great. Well, let's literally start from the beginning. What typically brings a family to contact you? What's going on in their world that they finally pick up the phone and call you?
Well, it's a lot of things, really. It can be a number of situations. It can be they've just started thinking about it. So they've entered retirement. It is a natural point of change in their lives. And they're thinking, I may need to do something to change either where I'm living, how I'm living, or explore options for the future. Or it could be in the middle of a crisis, an emergency, a sudden illness, accident, or surgery that predicates a call, and they're having just a panicky moment and saying, we need a little help navigating what's next. And that could be an older adult reaching out for themselves, or it could be their family. A lot I work with it right now, it's 50-50. It's working directly with aging adults, or it's working with their children or families.
We always talk about, learning by doing. What are the most common mistakes that you see families make when they're trying to choose care for a loved one? Because for someone who's not a professional like you, the options have to be through the roof.
They are. There's a lot out there, and it can be very overwhelming navigating, what the options are. And so a lot of times I will talk with families about what their priorities are and how to make decisions based on what they would like to see happen. Now, make no mistake, that takes some planning. People don't, if you're making a decision in a crisis or an emergency, that compounds the feeling of being overwhelmed or stressed. So a lot of times I'll talk with families about making decisions early before a crisis happens, having choices available to you when you have choices and have control over decisions that are being made. And hopefully you are the one making those decisions. Now, I'm going to talk about this as an analogy, and I can't take credit for this. I worked with a director of admissions years ago when I was first getting into senior living. And we were talking about how families are navigating senior living options, healthcare options. And she said, it's a lot like shopping for colleges. And being new to the industry, that made sense to me. And I'm thinking, I've expanded on that analogy over the years, and I've really dug in and pulled out instances that are relevant, especially when talking with older adults. And I will say, there's no 18-year-old in this country that comes September after high school graduation, puts on a backpack and says, I'm off to college. They don't. That's not how it happens. They've been thinking about it for years. They've been imagining themselves in different scenarios. And they've been asking themselves questions about what their preferences are. Do I want a big school or a small school in the city or in the country? What do I want the programs to be? What do I want the culture to be? And not to mention, their families have been planning financially for this for years. So when I speak with older adults and I say, well, congratulations, you are a high school junior and you've got these options ahead of you to make these decisions now based on priorities. What do you want a senior living experience to be like for you? Now, there's a lot more to it. You can talk about moving, you can talk about moving to a community, you can talk about simply downsizing, but answering those bigger questions early on will help shape decisions that you make going forward, especially if you're having to make a quick and important decision.
And you talk about important decisions. You're talking about quality of life decisions. So there's that added pressure. You really don't want to make a mistake that's going to decrease the quality of life about the aging person you really care about. And yet you've got in front of you, all these options of independent living, assisted living, memory care, skilled nursing. So the fact that you can be there as a professional, help families guide them through this maze is incredibly important.
Well, I can give you a couple of instances about how I can help families make decisions. And I've talked about priorities, outlining what your priorities might be, what your preferences might be. And sometimes that's hard to articulate. It is hard, it can be hard to say to someone, what do you want this to look like? How are you going to make a good decision for yourself? And a lot of times they'll say, well, I don't want something. I don't want to be a burden to my family. I don't want to have financial ruin because I've made a bad decision. I don't want to be unhappy going to a community, or I don't want to feel insecure staying at home. And so a lot of times people are making decisions to avoid something bad. And that's okay because it really does help formulate what they want to have happen. So by identifying what they don't want to have happen, actually improves our ability to make good decisions, which leads to a quality of life that they are designing.
One thing that I've been impressed with in terms of the services you provide is that you don't just hear families out and say, okay, here's your options, see you later.
Yes.
You're one of those professionals who is there every step of the way post decision. So when you guide a family to what is the ideal quality of life decision for their loved one, it's so amazing the degree of guidance you give them entirely through the process. And that I think is really distinguishes you and puts families, if not at ease, at least a little more confident about the direction they're going in.
Well, it's important to guide and be there every step of the way because one thing that's important to know, a decision that you make today may not be a good decision down the road. You may need to make a different decision as healthcare needs change, as senior living uh, options become more available or more relevant to you. So we all know that change is the only thing that stays the same in our world, but that's true here as well. So being with a family when they first start to think about, oh, well, maybe we should start exploring to, oh, we feel like we've made a good decision, we're going to move forward with that decision. 6 months from now, we may have a different decision to make. Something may have changed that's going to influence another step along our process here. So I appreciate that you recognize that, yes, I stay with families every step of the way, but that's because these situations can sometimes evolve. they can evolve fairly quickly. And so having a good relationship with a client, with a family, with their decision makers and influences really helps to make informed, good decisions that they're comfortable with as things change.
I want to talk for a minute or focus on um, decisions made as regards independent living, because from my vantage point, there seems to be an inherent contradiction built into that particular scenario, which in my mind's eye is yes, we want our loved one to live as independently as she or he can. But at the same time, what do we have to provide in terms of safety and
Mhm.
emotional support? How do you handle what, again, I consider such a contradiction?
Sure. It comes down, and I know I'm saying this a lot, but it comes down to what their priorities are. And I've worked with families who say, well, I'm just not sure. And you talk about living as independently as possible, as safely and as fulfilled as possible. But that's going to mean something different to everyone. What I feel is important to me is different than what you feel is important to you. One thing I've done with families, which has really been eye-opening, and it happened almost by accident when I started, was I gave a client a notebook calendar. It was a weekly calendar. You can get them anywhere, and you turn the page for a new week. And I said, just jot down what you're doing during the day, jot down what happens, what decisions you've made, what things you've had to take care of. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying we were in the very early stages of planning, and it was an overwhelming time. It was all options out on the table all at once, and we're saying we don't know, we're stuck, and that happens when you're presented with too many options and too many paths forward. It's easy to do nothing. And so I gave a client a notebook calendar. And I said, it's Saturday. Today's Saturday. Write down what you're doing today. Write down how you're feeling. Write down things, your to-do list, because one of the things that we had been talking to them about, and maybe we'll talk about this a little bit later, was it was a couple. They were I've been working with them for many years. Actually, I've known them for many years, and they were thinking about selling their home and moving to a senior living community or simply downsizing. But the thought of moving was overwhelming. And so we started off in saying, put your to-do list down on this calendar. But it turned into write down what you're doing, write down how you feel today, write down one of the things that you need to accomplish today, because we were marching towards the path of getting their home either ready to sell or an environment where they felt they could stay safely. And what it turned out to be over the course of several weeks was a mini journal. And it was eye-opening to say, okay, well, these were the things I wanted to do today. This is what I actually did, and this is how I'm feeling. And we're in New England, and we were starting on the early winter season, and we had a first snowfall. And in the journal, it said, it's snowing and I'm worried I'm going to get stuck. That was a huge thing to put in there. I'm worried I'm going to get stuck. Okay, you're going to get stuck how? In the house, not able to shovel, not able to get your car out, not able to walk the dog. So let's think about this. It's the very early winter in New England. Chances are we're going to have snow. What should we do now to make you feel more confident and comfortable being in your home, because that's where you are, through these months, and help alleviate that feeling of panic and stress of I'm going to be stuck? And that was hugely helpful to me because it gave me insight into their thought process and what their worries were. And also to them of, I want to avoid feeling stuck. So I'm going to put things in place that gives me the authority and the power and the confidence and the reassurance that I will not be stuck. So it was avoiding something that could potentially have been bad, and we turned it into a proactive path forward.
That is incredibly insightful. And especially both of us being from the Northeast, snow is, it really is a big factor. But what you also underscore is there are a lot more variables that go into independent living than you might think about at first blush. So I can appreciate how deep your qualifying, if you will, goes into making these kinds of decisions. Is there a typical path of how an aging individual progresses through different stages of their lives?
Um, the short answer is no. The longer answer is I've been doing this a long time. I have a really wonderful network of professionals that help as things arise as I'm working with families. I do in the back of my mind and also formally have things that I want to cover. So I do have a foundation of what do we want to look at as far as your living arrangements? What do we want to look at as far as a medical history or medical um, present? Now, I'm not medically inclined. I have no medical education, but one thing that we do take into consideration is, my doctor mentioned that I might want to think about assisted living. I might want to think about putting making my home safer to age in place. And that, what does that look like? And so it could be partnering with a home care agency. It could be partnering with an equipment company to talk about implementing things that have been recommended by their medical teams. Financial, for sure, is one of the top most concerns about people who are aging faced with decisions because they want to make good financial decisions that make sense for them. So there is not a typical path of aging, just like there's not a typical path for any of us at any age. Things can arise unexpectedly all the time, and we know that by living life. So being prepared and having resources at our fingertips to map out a safe and secure and a fulfilling pathway forward is incredibly helpful.
There are so many variables that go into your work in terms of financial, logistics, emotional, all the things that go into a quality of life decision like this. Do you ever run into a situation where everything is going right? You provided the best possible information, and yet families bring this X factor into it that puts the ideal path slightly left or slightly right. And how do you navigate out of that?
Two stories I can share of, you know, clients that I've worked with where we thought we'd done everything right. We thought we had made the best decisions. We've done some, preparation work of their preferences and priorities. And then, an unexpected surgery happens and a family member was in the hospital, an older adult was in the hospital with an unexpected surgery, and I had a list of where they wanted to go for rehab, post surgery rehab. Well, the places that they preferred that we had identified didn't have space at the time. So this does happen. You can map out what you want to have happen. If I have an unexpected event, an unexpected emergency surgery, and I have to go to an inpatient post-acute rehab, where do I want that to be? I'm going to name two places, and of course, that's where I'm going to go. Well, that doesn't always happen because you are at the mercy of availability as well as what your needs are. So the places that you might want to go may not specialize in the type of care you need. So
Mm,
when that happens, when the unexpected happens and you're thrown off the course that you thought you had mapped out, it's so important to do additional research on what your doctors are saying, get a clear picture, what they're recommending you do and where you go, and also who's going to be your advocate, who's going to be with you every step of the way to make sure that even though things are not going according to plan, that you understand what's happening and you open lines of communication with not only your care team of where you are, where you're going, your family, but also the person who's going to advocate for you when you get to where you're going. And this was the case of this family. We had to make sure that we had a good understanding of the needs of what the doctors were recommending and how we were going to make this a successful transition to have a successful outcome after this
Mm.
unexpected emergency surgery. Is that what you were looking for, I hope?
It, it does, and I love your answer to that and the examples you provided. It also made me think as you were speaking that it must be an incredible feeling of both joy and relief when families who probably had all kinds of doubts and wonders and worries before they met with you, once they go through the process of working with you, just how incredible and uplifting an experience it must be for them and for their aging loved one. I can only imagine.
Everyone wants the best possible outcome, and that's not only me and the client, but also their families and the people who they rely on for advice and who influence decisions. um, but one thing that I can tell you is that it's very important to be honest up front
Mhm.
with your preferences, because sometimes while the kids have good intentions, they may not know the full picture. And um, I've worked with families where and their parent was going into an assisted living, and the kids were very involved, and it was a wonderful family. They were very close, and the kids were saying, "Well, my father's a vegetarian, and I make his breakfast, and I make him homemade granola, and it's very important that the assisted living he's going to offers vegetarian options." And when he arrived at the assisted living and he filled out sort of his preference sheet, vegetarian was not mentioned. And he said, "Oh, they mean so well, and I'm so grateful to have them, but I'm not sure where they got that idea." And so, we were all saying, "You're so lucky to have this wonderful family and support system." And he's saying, "Yes, but I never really told them that I never corrected them when they said I was a vegetarian. So let's just play along with that." And it was very sweet. But to be open and honest, that's how you're going to have a successful experience. So everyone's heart was in the right place, everyone, and everyone was well-meaning. Um, but it still didn't quite get us to where we wanted to be.
Elizabeth, I want to ask you a question about you now, because you obviously, to be doing this, to be building a company around it, you obviously have a commitment, a motivation, a passion for this kind of work. How did you get started in it? What validated within you as a professional that yes, this was your chosen career? And how did Aging Well Connecticut come about?
Well, it's an interesting story. I've been in marketing and communications for 20 years. That is my professional field, with half of that time being in a senior living setting in a life plan community. And it was so incredibly rewarding working at a community that served older adults, because the focus was truly on resident centered and patient centered care. And that's so inspiring. So I loved working with this population, loved every day going in and feeling good about what I was doing, especially as we were navigating the pandemic, especially as we were navigating, a crisis outside of our doors. And my role in that community, because I was in marketing communications, shifted from helping resident or prospective residents navigate a senior living option, of which we were included, to communications and to really flexing my muscles as the organization was navigating a significant transformation and transition. So once things lifted, the pandemic, we were breathing a little sigh of relief. I actually changed industries and I went into corporate communications and helped an organization navigate significant change through transition management, transformative communications on the internal side. And it was rewarding. It was very rewarding to take that step as a marketing and communications professional. But I can tell you that during my time there, I continued to get calls from families. Either I had worked or known them in my senior living life, or it was neighbors or friends of neighbors who were working with a parent or an aging loved one, and they were looking for guidance. And I had this moment of there's a real need out there outside of my experience working with one community. And there is a real need for education. There's a real need for help navigating and gathering information. And so I started Aging Well Connecticut a little over a year ago based on, there was this need. And it is my hope that I can be a resource to families because, as we mentioned earlier, it's situational. Everyone is different. Everyone comes to you with different needs. So, what I thought I knew after working at one community was different the moment someone approached me with, here's a situation, and it was outside of my experience. And so, I dug in and did my homework and did research and presented them with options that were relevant to their what they were going through, and through that just evolved. And that was years of informal um, help and guidance that I was able to provide to people who were calling, looking for someone to help them. And that was the light bulb moment. They were looking for someone who had some information, who they trusted, and that's a huge piece of it, is the trust aspect, to help present them with options that could help them make a good decision.
I'm so glad you made that background in corporate transformation and transition into the world you're in now, because the amount of people you help is incredible. Um, there are probably, and I'm sure of it, a lot of families out there who have, for one reason or another, put off a decision um, about their loved one, but something has happened that now it's gone from putting it on the back burner to we have to do something. And
Right.
can you share with those families what the process is like of working with you, and how do they get started, and how do they contact you, how do they reach out to you? um, if you'd share that, that would be great.
Sure. So my organization is called Aging Well CT. It's agingwellct.net, and there's a list of services. Not every service that I offer along with my team is going to be appropriate for every person who visits the site. But to help someone who's has an inkling or knows that they have to make a change, it's really a two-step process. It's addressing the short-term need. So what's happening now that is making them reach out, that's having them have the thought that we need some help. We could use some support in this instance. And then the second step is, what are the longer term goals? So I can help with the short term. Let's navigate what's happening now and get us to a spot where we're comfortable, where the older loved one is feeling secure, gets the help and support they need. What are we doing as far as this immediate need? And then what are we going to do for a longer term success? So whether that is a living arrangement that needs to be modified or changed, so they either have to to make modifications to their existing residence to live safely, and we will rely on their medical teams to help direct that and guide that. And or it's a move, complete move of, something happened. What's our short-term need? And this isn't sustainable. So what do we do next? And it's a full move to independent living where there's some support or at least a downsize, or it's an assisted living or skilled nursing scenario because their needs dictate that level of care and that environment.
Well, I have to tell you, Elizabeth, I can't thank you enough for all the helpful information you've shared, and for being out there to help families navigate through these emotional and complex quality of life decisions. Because, when we talk about loved ones, there's a whole new layer of depth there that's not in other life challenges. And just the fact that you're out there is so incredible. And again, if you would share with listeners where they can reach out to you, that would be terrific.
Sure. Well, agingwellct.net is my website. Aging Well Anyway is also on LinkedIn and Facebook. You can reach me there. And I'm always available for a consultative call. So someone may say, well, I'm just starting to think about it. What should I be thinking about? And I'm happy to have those, initial conversations to at least get the conversation started because people may say, oh, it's never too early to think about, but it can be too late. And it's not necessarily that it's too late, it's just that your decision-making power and your options may be limited. Whereas if you start to work with someone, work with me, or explore options before you have a need, the very first time you think that you may have a question, that's really the best time to reach out.
Terrific. Thank you again, Elizabeth, and thank you to our Geezers, Gadgets, and Gizmos followers for always being there, for being our faithful audience. And if you're new to Geezers, Gadgets, and Gizmos, be sure to check out our website and our YouTube channel. So until then, we'll speak with you soon and live a great life.
Subscribe and hit the bell so you'll never miss an episode of Geezers, Gadgets, and Gizmos.